I'm David Suchet, and I'm on a journey around the Mediterranean, following in the footsteps of a man who 2,000 years ago traveled more than 10,000 miles around the Roman world on foot, and many, many more by sea.
This is extraordinary. We must appear that size from up there.
For the last 25 years, I've been fascinated by St. Paul. He was a hugely controversial figure in his own time. He still is today. To some, he's the man who did more than anyone else to transform Christianity from a small Jewish sect into the most powerful religion on earth. To others, he's a preacher of prejudices that have echoed down throughout history.
And they must have thought the arrogance of the man. Here he is on the basis of one vision, so he says. He's telling everybody what they should do.
Changing all the rules.
A man of contrasts and confusions. But if there ever was an historical character I've longed to play, it is Paul. So for me, this is a very personal quest.
I could look like that. What do you think? A little bit.
A little bit.
I'll be seeking out clues in the places he visited, deciphering new evidence from the latest archaeological research, and meeting expert witnesses from around the region to help me uncover this remarkable man hidden within the pages of the New Testament. Every year, millions of visitors from all over the world make pilgrimages here to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, to what they believe is the site of the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. But the reason they remember this crucified carpenter is down to just one extraordinary man. We know him as St. Paul.
More than any other individual, Paul was responsible for transforming a fledgling Jesus movement from a minor sect of Judaism into a new religion that would one day become known as Christianity.
Without him, the new faith could have died out 2,000 years ago. Paul was Christianity's first international ambassador, taking the story of Jesus out to the pagan world, sowing the seeds of a new idea that would sweep through the Roman Empire and change the course of Western civilization. Paul's story is told in the New Testament book of Acts and preserved in a remarkable series of his own letters written to small communities of believers scattered around the Roman world.
It was one of these letters that I read when I was filming in America about 25 years ago now. I read it in a hotel room. It was addressed simply to the Romans.
Even after 2,000 years, the extraordinary passion of Paul's words leap from the page. The hour has come for you to wake from your slumber, because our salvation is nearer now than we first believed. The night is nearly over. The day is almost here. Paul's letter to the small Christian community in Rome inspired and fashioned my own faith.
I became fascinated by him. As an actor, I actually felt I would like to play him. What sort of man was he? What gave him this power? How did he actually change Western thought?
To understand this man, I need to get a sense of his world. My journey of discovery starts here, in Jerusalem, the spiritual home of the Jewish people.
It's so good to be up here and to look down on this extraordinary city.
Today, Jerusalem is home to 3 of the world's major religions. For Jews, Christians, and Muslims, it's one of the most holy places on earth.
I don't think you can ever forget when you're up here that this is possibly the most religious city in the world.
But 2 millennia ago, Judaism and the strict requirements of Jewish law dominated this city and every aspect of Paul's early life. Today, Jewish boys enter the world of adulthood at the age of 13. From this point, they are considered responsible for their own actions under Jewish law. The dream of every boy and his parents is to have the bar mitzvah, his coming-of-age ceremony, here at the Western Wall, a remnant of the massive Jewish temple which stood here in Paul's time.
I mean, to all intents and purposes, it could be a wedding. This is Paul's early life. This is what he longed for as a young boy. It's a rites of passage into the Jewish faith. Very important moment. And here comes their law, with all the sweets being thrown. You touch it. See, they don't mind who touches it. I touched it. I'm being pushed out of the way now.
The Western, or Wailing Wall, is a reminder that in Paul's day the temple was the very heart and soul of the Jewish religion. To reach back to his time, I need to look beneath the surface of the modern city.
Now we are going now down underground to a tunnel. And that tunnel was built under the main street of Jerusalem. You see how deep you go down.
Jerusalem is one of the world's richest archaeological sites, and recent excavations offer tantalizing glimpses of the city Paul would have known. Archaeologist Eli Shukron took me beneath the streets to a recently discovered drainage channel filled with historical clues.
This is really narrow.
You are in a tunnel.
I'm in a tunnel, all right.
Yeah, this is the experience.
I'm in a 2,000-year-old tunnel.
Yeah. You saw that stone?
Yeah.
This is the foundation of the Wailing Wall. Let's see it closely.
This is the original
Stone, original foundation of the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall.
The Wailing Wall. So we're right underground.
We are right underground on the bedrock. You see, this is the bedrock, and this is the first stone of the Western Wall.
How old?
2,000 years.
2,000 years.
Yes.
That is mind-boggling, actually, absolutely. Look at the size of them. What am I going to do now? Am I going to dig?
Yes, of course. We're going to dig. We're going to dig in our excavation.
I'm going to uncover a bit of the Western Wall for the first time in 2,000 years. Wow.
And then what you need to do is just to take the dirt here between the stone of the Western Wall, okay? And here we have a piece of pottery.
Oh?
Piece of jar, the rim of the jar.
2,000 years old.
There's dirt on it. And this is the rim. You can see the rim of the jar.
There it is, look. And I'm uncovering the Western Wall now.
Now
I've got the Western Wall for the first time.
Yes. You never know.
You never know with every move that I make with this what will be uncovered. I'd like to spend a longer time here. Change of career, perhaps?
You love your job now, David.
I love my job.
Scraping away at the foundations of the Western Wall had literally put me in touch with Paul's time. But darker clues to Paul's world had survived in these tunnels. Jerusalem may have been Jewish, but it was also occupied by a brutal foreign invader.
Eli's just told me this stone is the main street.
Above us.
Above us.
Yeah. This is the main street.
So that's the main street, and we're in the main drain.
The tunnel had been built to drain rainwater from Temple Mount, the site of the Jewish temple. But it was to become a secret escape route for rebel Jews. In the year 6 AD, around the time of Paul's birth, Jerusalem fell under direct rule of the Roman Empire. The Jews never accepted Roman occupation. Their very presence defiled the holy city, but any protest was mercilessly put down. The Roman army maintained its iron grip on Jerusalem throughout Paul's life. In 70 AD, a few years after his death, they would lay waste to the city, destroy the Jewish temple, and on discovering these tunnels, they massacred everyone they found.
Did you find any Roman artifacts in here?
Yeah, we found a sword.
A Roman sword?
Roman sword, yes.
God, I wouldn't like to have escaped in this tunnel. It's very, with no light.
Yeah, there's no light. You know, it's very, 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 very...
People frightened.
Yeah, people fighting, and the Roman above you, on the street, walking.
Gosh.
Paul spent his whole life under the dark shadow of Roman rule. I was keen to discover how that influenced the man and his beliefs. Since antiquity, Jews have sought to be buried here on the Mount of Olives, where they believe their long-awaited Messiah, God's chosen leader, will first appear to usher in the end of days. A new era, free of war and strife. By being buried here, they hope to be among the first to be resurrected from the dead. It was a good place to meet Jewish historian Danny Schwartz.
But on the side, members of the family added the names of the members of the family who were killed in Auschwitz.
Oh, my goodness.
Including the son of the person who is buried here, and the grandson, and the wife of the grandson.
Jews like Paul believed themselves to be a chosen people, their history and destiny controlled by God. But now Rome, not God, appeared to be in charge. For many, the end of days, when God would send his Messiah to liberate them, could not come soon enough.
Did they ever think that it might be the beginning of the end times?
They probably did. The Roman occupation pushed people into something of an apocalyptic mood, that the time is going to have to come very soon.
Very soon.
When this is going to work out. God can't sit back idly and let everything like this be trampled.
Jerusalem was in political and religious turmoil. How should Jews respond to the Roman occupation? Competing groups fought for control of Jewish hearts and minds. Some preached armed resistance, others that only God could decide when Roman rule should end. Paul, at that time still known by his Jewish name Saul, chose to join the Pharisees, a strictly Jewish sect who believed that the end of days could be brought forward in time by rigid observance of the Jewish law. Paul was Jewish, but we're told also that he held Roman citizenship, and that he'd spent his childhood not in Jerusalem, but in Tarsus, that's in modern-day Turkey. Could a confused sense of belonging help explain Paul's personality? One of the world's leading authorities on Paul is Father Jerome Murphy O'Connor. He had a surprising theory about how Paul came by his Roman citizenship and how it had affected him.
He was, I believe, the son of slaves. I think he became a Roman citizen when his parents were set free. No one kept a slave into his 40s. It was non-productive economically. And the children of slaves of a Roman citizen automatically became a Roman citizen on being set free.
The Book of Acts claims Paul left Tarsus for Jerusalem.
Paul came to Jerusalem, I believe, about the age of 20. He was a Jew looking for his roots. When he came to Jerusalem and became a Pharisee, the law became the focal point of his life.
Perhaps becoming a Pharisee answered some need in Paul to belong, and he threw himself into a zealous defense of the Jewish law. But then, around 32 AD, a radical new Jewish sect appeared on the scene, inspired by the recent execution of a rabbi from Galilee. the Jesus movement threatened everything Paul held most dear.
Basically, I'm walking up the Via Dolorosa, which is the way they say that Jesus walked to his crucifixion, carrying his cross. It's an extraordinary feeling to be part of a group like this. You're almost caught up in it, you can't help it.
Today, Christianity is the world's largest religion. It's easy to forget that 2,000 years ago it was just a minor sect of Judaism. The Jesus movement could easily have withered and died with the death of its leader. But soon after the crucifixion, Jesus' followers became convinced that God had raised him from the dead, that he was the Jewish Messiah, and that claim sparked a violent response from Paul and his fellow Pharisees.
What was the trouble? What was going on with this sect that would have made Paul so angry?
So Paul is, at that stage, showing his zeal for the law, that these misguided Christians believed that Jesus was the Messiah. But if Jesus was the Messiah, then the law had no longer had any place. And the law was what made Paul's life at that stage as a Pharisee. And I think that's why he persecuted Christians. They wanted it to have it both ways, to be Christians and practicing Jews. Paul said, no, it's either or.
Observance of the law was everything to Paul. How dare these Jewish heretics claim that Jesus was the long-awaited Messiah? If so, then a new age had begun, and the law was no longer important. In Paul's eyes, they should be wiped from the face of the earth. For you have heard of my previous way of life in Judaism, how intensely I persecuted the Church of God and tried to destroy it. I was extremely zealous for the traditions of my fathers. According to the book of Acts, Paul focused his anger on one of the leading lights of the Jesus movement, a young man called Stephen, who had been successfully convincing Jews like Paul to convert. Stephen was dragged outside the city gates and viciously stoned to death. We're told Paul stood watching, apparently minding the coats of the executioners.
In those cases where you hear of people being stoned in Jewish antiquity, I think generally it's a mob action.
And why stoning?
Stoning is a kind of popular thing to do. Anybody can do it. You don't need special equipment.
You mean it's all around you, you just pick it up?
Just pick them up and do that. It's the type of thing mobs can do.
It must have been a pretty ugly thing then, to be stoned by mob rule.
I'm sure that being stoned was a very ugly thing. It doesn't leave all that much of the body when so many stones have been thrown.
So being a Pharisee, that would be a sort of normal reaction to that?
Certainly, to oppose people who are preaching the abrogation of Jewish law would be normal. How far you go with that, does it take you to stoning, is another issue.
Paul seemed consumed with hatred for the Jesus movement. Yet there was something about this man I just didn't understand.
Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast. It is not proud, it is not rude. It is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil. It seems strange to me that someone who can stand by, witness, and even condone such an atrocity of stoning another human being to death is also capable of writing some of the most beautiful words ever written, and are used in wedding ceremonies around the world, even to this very day.
What transformed this zealous persecutor of the Jesus movement into its greatest ambassador? According to the Bible, the answer lies on the road to Damascus, in one of the most fantastic and dramatic stories ever told. Paul is on his way to root out more followers of Jesus when suddenly his whole world is turned around.
And And according to Acts, on his way to Damascus, he had a conversion experience. He saw a blinding light that literally blinded him physically. He heard the voice of Jesus saying, Saul, using his Jewish name, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he was given his commission to evangelize the Gentiles. It was a changing moment in Paul's life, and we often refer to it now as the blinding light experience of conversion. But I would like to find out what really happened.
In the Bible, deserts lend themselves to life-changing moments. Both Jesus and Moses had spent time in the wilderness. To help me make sense of Paul's conversion, I met psychologist Shmuel Elric.
I'm searching for Paul the character. I can't ignore that central conversion experience. How do I make that change?
I would suggest that you look very carefully and deeply into his past. You look into what happened before, into his persecution, into his aggression, into his need to kill Christians, which I think speaks of some kind of an inner turmoil. What you see, especially in people who are struggling with their identity, and if the struggle is very deep, you see that they can sometimes turn around, almost, if you will, 180 degrees, and from what you would consider to be one identity, suddenly become the opposite of it.
Right.
I think this is what happened with St. Paul. He persecuted the Christians before, and then suddenly he shifted completely and became their spokesman and their guardian in a way, their promoter and their leader, really.
Whatever really happened on the road to Damascus, it's clear that from that moment on, Paul's beliefs changed forever. He was now convinced he had met Jesus face to face, that God had brought him back from the dead, and that therefore he must be the Messiah, and that the end of days was coming very, very soon. Paul is said to have returned to Jerusalem to try and convince the leadership of the Jesus movement that whatever his crimes against them in the past, he was now on their side. That God had chosen him to be an apostle, on a par with the disciples who had actually known Jesus. It must have been a difficult sell. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the leadership suggested that their former persecutor would be of most use to them away from Jerusalem, back in his home city of Tarsus, in modern-day Turkey.
Tarsus.
Yes, here we are.
Where Paul was born.
Yes.
How had Paul's childhood home influenced his life? My guide Munir grew up in Tarsus and agreed to show me around.
Are there many sites that one can go to that will see where Paul went in the city? Is he very famous here?
Very famous. We have St. Paul's Well, St. Paul's House, St. Paul's Church, many St. Paul cafes.
And is he a popular character? Do people like him?
They love him. It's their famous son.
Tarsus is a Muslim city and has been for centuries. So I was intrigued by how today's population regarded Paul. After Friday prayers, Munir took me to the Grand Mosque to meet some of the locals.
Could you ask our friend what he might know about St. Paul?
Şimdi St. Paul, aziz, muhterem St. Paul büyüğümüz.
We know him as a Christian saint who had this incredible energy. He walked for miles. He probably had a donkey, and he went from one village to another and explained all about Jesus, what Jesus was saying.
How much has Tarsus changed since you were a child?
The essence of Tarsus is the same. In other words, it's retained its values. This about, I think the most important value Tarsus has is tolerance for each other. This area is liberal. Tarsus is liberal. Probably this is the influence of St. Paul.
Yeah. Do you think
it has to be? What else?
Because of St. Paul?
Yes, what else?
It was fascinating that here in Muslim Tarsus, Paul was remembered as a liberal influence. Let us stop passing judgment on one another. Make up your mind not to put any stumbling block or obstacle in your brother's way. Munir had given me a great introduction to the modern city, but I was keen to find out what Tarsus would have been like in Paul's day.
Thank you very much. Which way do I go?
You go this way.
All right.
I go.
How had it shaped him as a boy? And what had he learned here that would help him on his new mission to win converts to Jesus? At one of the city's few remaining Roman sites, I met archaeologist Sarah Duragonal.
This is the only known archaeological remain we have from the time period Paulus has lived here in this city.
This is a Roman road?
This is a Roman road. It is dated to the 1st century BC or AD. We are not yet sure, but there is a very similar example for this road in Pompeii, which is dated to the 1st century BC.
Would Paul have actually walked along this road, do you think?
We think so. We can imagine that he walked through because it's just the time period he has lived here. So he must have walked here.
Was this a busy, busy city?
Yes, it was a very important city because it was a philosophical city. Many philosophers passed by from this city.
Did they?
And we know that there was a school for philosophy in this town. So alone this shows that it was an important city.
And is that possibly why Paul would have said, I'm a citizen of no ordinary city?
Yes, that can be a good explanation for this sentence.
So he was very proud of this city. And he's also very proud of his dual, if you like, dual citizenship and nationality. He says, I'm a Jew and I'm a Roman.
Yes, both characters. And he knows perfect Greek. He is educated in that language. He has the Roman citizenship and he is a Jew.
Paul's early life had been very different from that of Jesus and the disciples. Paul had grown up in a city, was highly educated and well-versed in Greek philosophy. But in one respect he was similar. We're told he had a craft and earned his living as a tent maker. The countryside around Tarsus was famous for its flax, the plant used to make linen. Perhaps Paul wove his tents. My guide Ali took me to a traditional weaver's shop for a lesson with the irrepressible Hassan, who even though he's now in his 70s, clearly still loves his work.
I can have a go? Oh, well, I've done certain things in my life. This is a first. Oh my goodness me. What am I doing?
Push it back. Right feet. Left feet.
I'm working my feet.
Paul was certainly proud of the fact he worked for a living and didn't rely on anyone for handouts.
Shuffle, left foot.
We did not eat anyone's food without paying for it. On the contrary, we worked day and night, laboring and toiling so that we would not be a burden to any of you.
We were doing well. We were doing well. I'm afraid that's all that's left of the show. I don't think I'm going to pass this particular exam.
Paul had earned his living as a tent maker, was highly educated, and held dual citizenship. But first-century Tarsus had influenced his life in another way. Most of Paul's fellow citizens would have been non-Jews or Gentiles, believers in pagan gods. Sarah asked me to meet her again in the mountains above the city, where she had recently made an incredible discovery.
Gosh, she's so clear. Wow, look at that.
This is the goddess Athena.
Athena.
Athena. Can you see what sort of a symbol we have outside the pillar?
Just here?
Exactly.
That looks like the candlestick, the Jewish symbol. That's the menorah.
Exactly. It's the menorah.
Oh, I can't believe that the Jewish symbol, really, is so close to Athena, the pagan goddess.
Yes.
What does that say about the society here?
It says to us that the people here lived peacefully together, even though they were other beliefs. This is a shrine. It's not only a relief, it's a cultic place, it's a shrine. So we can imagine that Jewish people came together with the pagans and came to pray here.
At the same time?
At the same time.
When was this carved into the rock?
It was carved at the end of the 2nd century or the beginning of the 3rd century AD, the Roman period.
So Paul would never have seen this,
No.
he wouldn't have seen this. But the same thing may have been going on at the time that he was around.
Yes, why not?
The Jewish menorah carved alongside the pagan goddess Athena spoke of a culture of religious tolerance. Tarsus appeared to be the sort of place where different peoples and religions could learn from and influence each other. Perhaps this sowed a seed in Paul, because he, more than any other, would be the person who would bridge the gap between the Jewish and non-Jewish worlds. A process he probably began on his return to his home city.
I'm sure Paul must have had some success in Tarsus, because he was then called to the huge cosmopolitan city of Antioch to help build a new community of believers. Wow, what a breathtaking view of the city.
Today, the biblical city of Antioch is known as Antakya. On the outskirts of the city, I passed the magnificent Iron Gate, one of the few survivors from ancient times. And a little further down the valley, carved into the mountainside, was a site that tradition says played an important role in early Christianity. It's here that I met New Testament scholar Helen Bond.
That's quite pretty, actually.
It does, isn't it?
This is St. Peter's Church, where, according to church tradition, the church at Antioch met, and St. Paul is even supposed to have preached here on occasion.
Really?
Yes.
Who was he preaching to then?
Well, it's really interesting because this is a mixed community of people, people from Antioch. Some of them are Jews, some of them are non-Jews, all kinds of people that have heard about the new faith and have been anxious to join. A lot of people in the ancient world were quite interested in Jewish ideas, the idea of monotheism, one God, the Jewish ethics. And so Christianity was a little bit like that. Clearly it was coming from a Jewish background. Yeah. I think also at this time there was an interest in people towards a sort of more personal kind of religion, perhaps something more than the gods of Rome were offering. He's also talking about something he believes, the end of the world is going to come soon, you've got to prepare yourself, get ready. I think, in this kind of place, a big, thriving city like this, that might have been quite attractive to a lot of people.
And Paul was an urban man, wasn't he? He was a city man, and he would have worked here, and would he have been comfortable?
I think he would. I think he'd have been entirely at home in a place like Antioch. It was very similar in many ways to Tarsus, where he was from, and very different, I think, to the kind of places that Jesus and the disciples were used to. You know, they were much more rural men. For Paul, you know, he's part of this establishment.
Yes.
You know, he can talk to anybody in this city. He's perfectly at home here. Whereas I think it would have been much more difficult for the first followers of Jesus.
In Antioch, the Jesus movement was building a bridge between the Jewish and non-Jewish worlds, and Paul's skills in talking and preaching to non-Jews made him the ultimate bridge builder.
Coming into a cafe like this, into a sort of social situation, Paul would have been very used to doing this sort of thing, sitting amongst men while they were playing games. I don't think much would have changed in 2,000 years, and he might have taken advantage of the situation and started chatting about his beliefs.
Something about Paul's message clearly rang true in Antioch. I wondered if Helen was right, that maybe he was offering a more caring alternative to the brutal norms of Roman society. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. It was in Antioch that the followers of Jesus were first called Christians, but their numbers were small, too small for a dedicated church. Paul is said to have preached instead in private homes. It was a tactic that was to serve him well. Holding meetings in a house not only afforded a venue, but also gave him access to a wider network of family and friends who could help spread the word. When the Roman Catholics came here, they took their lead from Paul.
Father Dominic.
Oh, you're welcome.
Hello.
You can see where is today the Catholic Church. It is not a church in that time, it was a private house. But we know that the first Christians, they have the meeting in private houses, they called house church. So after 2,000 years, we are in the same situation.
So you have a house church?
We have a house church.
Is that why there's not an official big Catholic church?
No, it was a private house that we have managed to use as a church.
Living and working closely with these non-Jewish communities, Paul came to understand that some requirements of the new faith could be a barrier to conversion. He adapted his message. But back in Jerusalem, that was seen as a threat to the purity of Judaism. High above the city, in the 6th century ruins of St. Simeon's monastery, I met Helen again.
So what was Paul teaching that was so new?
Paul was saying to the Gentiles that you can become part of the Jesus movement without first becoming a Jew. So you didn't have to be circumcised, you didn't have to keep the Jewish law. All you need to be part of the Jesus movement is to believe in what God has done through Jesus, the cross and resurrection. That's the central thing, and faith in that is going to save you. Nothing else really matters. And that was really radical, because this is the first time really that Gentiles have been coming into the movement without first becoming Jews.
In Jerusalem, converts to the new religion were already Jewish. They kept Jewish law, and the males had been circumcised. In Antioch, Paul was converting Gentiles who liked the idea of worshipping the Jewish God, but weren't willing to undergo a rigorous conversion to Judaism.
For Paul, though, he gradually sees that if it doesn't matter anymore for your salvation that you have to keep the law, then why do you have to become a Jew? You know, you can become a follower of Christ and stay a Gentile.
Being very radical then.
Extremely radical, and also in the face of people who'd known Jesus.
Yes.
I mean, I think that's the amazing thing about him. And they must have thought the arrogance of the man. Here he is, on the basis of one vision, so he says, on the road to Damascus.
Behaving.
And he's telling everybody what they should do.
Changing all the rules.
Paul had come to realize that the only way he was going to convert large numbers of Gentiles to Jesus was by dropping the need to become a Jew first. He was typically bullish about that mission and was prepared to use any means necessary to bring non-Jews to his new faith, even if that meant they no longer needed to observe the Jewish law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law. I have become all things to all men, so that by all possible means I might save some. Paul had now set himself on a collision course with the leadership of the Jesus movement in Jerusalem.
They summoned Paul back to Jerusalem to account for his methods in converting the Gentiles. Now, Paul was certainly heading for trouble, but it wouldn't be for the first time, or indeed the last.
I'm off to meet the Greek Patriarch of Jerusalem, Theophilus III. The Patriarchate traces its line of succession all the way back to James, the brother of Jesus, and the leader of the movement after Jesus' death. It was to James and his Jerusalem council that Paul came to argue his case that Gentile converts to Christianity did not first have to convert to Judaism.
Good morning, Your Beatitude. It's very nice to meet you.
Me too.
Thank you very much for letting me.
If he lost the argument, Paul risked both his mission to the Gentiles coming to a grinding halt and personal humiliation.
Yes, please.
Could you tell me what the outcome was from the Jerusalem Council?
We must understand, if we put ourselves in his position, right? He was lonely. He was the only one that undertook this mission to go and preach to Gentiles. So again, he broke the closed circle. It was difficult. Paul, of course, defended his case. Paul was a wise man. Don't forget that he was well versed in Greek philosophy and literature, right? So he had developed a very open mind. St. James was a very wise elder, and he did not reject Paul's argument, right?
This has been really kind of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
The conflict was resolved in Paul's favor. Neither circumcision nor uncircumcision means anything. What counts is the new creation. Paul had won the day. He was now free to convert Gentiles directly to the Jesus movement without first taking them into Judaism. It was to be a key moment in the evolution of Christianity, which was now well on the way to becoming a new religion separate from Judaism. The whole Gentile world now lay before Paul. It was time to hit the road. By the middle of the 1st century AD, a grid of good paved roads and clear shipping lanes crisscrossed the Roman Empire. Travelers like Paul could now cover enormous distances swiftly and in greater safety than ever before. It's been calculated that during his journeys, Paul covered more than 10,000 miles on foot.
See, I had to find the walk for Poirot, but once that was found, it helped me with the character so much. And now this is helping me understand Paul, how he walked, where he walked. the sort of road he would have travelled on and the speed he would have walked. It tells me a lot about that man. I think he was a speedy man, very speedy.
The road would carry Paul to Ephesus, the greatest city in the whole of Roman Asia, a pagan stronghold. The city was absolutely devoted to the fertility goddess Artemis. Her cult drew worshippers from across the ancient world, and Ephesus had grown rich on the tourist trade. Paul's message that there was only one true god and it wasn't Artemis was bound to cause trouble. At the ancient entrance to the city, I met archaeologist Julian Bennett.
At the time St. Paul would have been here, this would have been full of ships, probably 100 or so ships.
Right up to here?
Right up to here. We're actually more or less on the harbour edge. We're standing at the harbour gateway here. When you look up into the distance, you can see the hills going round there. The river would have come right up to here, the sea would have come right up to here as well.
What would Paul have found when he first arrived here as far as religion was concerned? What would he have been faced with?
Artemis the goddess.
The goddess?
The main goddess of the city. This is her birthplace. This is where she belongs. She has her wonderful temple just outside the city, one of the 7 wonders of the world. It would have been standing, built beautiful white marble. I mean, Paul would have seen this when he sailed into the harbour. He would have known he was coming into a nest of paganism, if you like.
I've always read that Paul, first of all, went to synagogues to preach whenever he visited somewhere. Was there a Jewish population here?
Yes, there was a very large one, certainly from 300 years before the time of Paul. We don't know exactly how large, but possibly between 5,000 and 10,000, and the population stayed here even after Paul carried on being Jewish as well. And we can see that quite clearly from the menorah.
Oh my
into the library here. And somebody's sitting down one day, carving this away.
Carving on the steps of a library?
Yes.
Ephesus had no problem tolerating other gods. Even the Jewish god was being worshipped here. But Paul threatened the status quo. His new way was exclusive, and his message to Ephesus was blunt. The end of the world is coming. You waste your time with idols. Artemis is no god at all and cannot save you. You must follow Jesus, an obscure crucified carpenter from Galilee. One thing you have to say about Paul, he certainly wasn't bothered by conflict.
This is a 1st century statue of the goddess Artemis. I wonder if this could have been the very one that Paul might have looked at. And try to imagine what he would have felt when he saw this image for the very first time. He probably thought the very same things as actually came out of his mouth. You're just made of stone. Push you over and you'll break into hundreds of pieces. We know the cult of Artemis goes back 1,000 years before Paul even arrived. And what sort of man must he have been to come to a city like this that had been worshipping a goddess Artemis for 1,000 years and believed that he could change their system of belief.
But Paul was not only taking on a long-established religion, he was also threatening the very economy of Ephesus. His message put people's livelihoods at risk. Those who came to worship Artemis were unlikely to leave without first buying a small copy of the goddess as a souvenir.
I'm going to be taught how to make an icon here. I've never made an icon before. Oh, this is going to be fun. Oh, thank you. I'm glad I wore black.
For the city's idol makers, anyone converting pagans was bad for business.
I don't think St. Paul would be too happy with me doing this, considering I have now become an idol maker.
Ephesus Theatre.
Ephesus Theatre.
Yes.
And here?
Yes.
I think he's got me working on the whole thing here. I'm now building a theatre.
Okay.
Oh, here she is. There she is, just out of the oven. As I said, I'm glad I wore black. Oh my goodness me. I have never ever done this. It's the back of her dress coming through. And her head and her face. There she is. That's what all the fuss was about. And that's what he came to change.
Artemis was perhaps Paul's greatest challenge. He spent longer in Ephesus than anywhere on his travels. But opposition to Paul's preaching was growing. Eventually, we're told, craftsmen worried about both their religion and their trade led a riot against Paul.
They all gathered together here in this theatre. And Demetrius, who was a silversmith who was making idols of Artemis, addressed the crowd. Men, you know we receive a good income from this business, and you see and hear how this fellow Paul has convinced and led astray large numbers of people here in Ephesus and in practically the whole province of Asia. He says that man-made gods are no gods at all. There is danger that not only our trade will lose its good name, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis will be discredited, and the goddess herself, who is worshipped throughout the province of Asia and the world, will be robbed of her divine majesty. And he really did. He whipped up the crowd to a frenzy, and they started shouting, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians! Great is Artemis of the Ephesians! Great is Artemis of the Ephesians!" You can hear it ringing around the theatre. And it was very soon after this that Paul probably realized that his life was in danger. And after 2 years, he decided it was time to leave.
Paul had been forced to leave the city, but it appears his work here was not in vain. Ephesus was one of the great hubs of the empire, and visitors to the city eventually went home. Some of them took Paul's message with them. His words were spreading across Asia Minor. Ephesus is still being excavated, but so far no churches dedicated to Paul or traces of his time here have been discovered inside the city. But high above Ephesus, in a mountainside cave, I was told there was a reminder of him.
I'm here on a hillside above Ephesus, and my guide Suchet is going to show me a cave that's associated with St. Paul. I'm looking forward to this very much indeed. This is quite a climb, but I think it's going to be worth it. Nearly there.
Discovered in 1906, the Grotto of St. Paul is thought to have been a sacred Christian site since the 1st or 2nd century.
Got my torch. Ha! Look there. But there he is, my goodness. I've been hearing about him and talking about him so much, and that's extraordinary to see. It's a bit scary, actually, isn't it? Because if I grew a beard, that wouldn't be too dissimilar to me. A little bit.
A little bit.
Wouldn't take too much, though, would it? Let's go down there. What's down here? Oh, there's some more. Some more frescoes. Oh, goodness. These look like saints. And there's a lot of them. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
The grotto was decorated with frescoes and inscriptions over the course of many centuries. The portrait of Paul was added in the 6th century, along with that of St. Thecla, famous locally as a female follower of Paul.
Yeah, he does look like me, doesn't he? That's really weird. Anyway, bye-bye. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Seeing the image of Paul and Thecla in Paul's grotto really inspired me to find out more about their story, and I was reading a book called Acts of Paul and Thecla. And there was
what I believe to be the only physical description of Paul ever written, and I put it down in my notebook. He was a man of middling size, and his hair was scanty, and his legs were a little crooked, and his knees were projecting, and he had large eyes. His eyebrows met, his nose was somewhat long, and he was full of grace and mercy. At one time he seemed like a man, and at another time he seemed like an angel. Now, apart from the physical description, I was also very interested, because I think that also describes his personality. At one time, he could seem very direct, very human, very earthy. He certainly didn't suffer fools gladly. And at another time, he could be very fatherly and very gentle.
Paul's journeys through Asia Minor helped lay the foundations of the faith that would one day become Christianity. Even though Turkey is now a Muslim country, his influence lasts to this day. Something I've got no doubt about at all is that he was a man of total extremes. There was no grey area about Paul. It was either black or white. Whatever happened to him on the road to Damascus was extreme, and it changed his worldview forever.
But what's really interesting for me is that it didn't change his personality or character. He was a man of total conviction and extremes of behavior. He could be very angry, imperious, proud. He could be very boastful, my way, not yours. He had also a fanatical drive and energy because he genuinely believed that Jesus was going to come back soon, and for him the end of the world was really imminent. So I've learned a great deal about this man, and I'm not sure at the moment whether I like him very much. Would I have dinner with him? Well, I don't know, perhaps just one course. But I've only found out about him so far. There's so much more that I need to know to have a fully rounded character, so much more that I need to discover about this extraordinary man. After 10 years or so of travel through what is now modern-day Turkey, Paul managed to set up small Christian communities in the major cities of Rome's Eastern Empire. And these cities were always situated either on major roads or in major seaports. And it was from these cities that the message was able to spread out to the surrounding countryside. But in a letter to the Romans, Paul wrote, "There is no more place for me to work in these regions." And so in a sense, I suppose, Paul's work in Asia Minor was done, and so he set his sights firmly towards the West. He wrote again, "It's always been my ambition to preach the gospel where Christ was not known." And so his journey into Europe was about to begin, and this set him on a collision course with the power of Rome.
The story concludes tomorrow at the same time.